Hey, friends. This is Martine Williams, and I am obsessed with all things mompreneur life and helping you to remix your priorities, your habits, your mindsets, and yes, even your relationships so that you can build a successful business without losing yourself in the process. I'm also obsessed with the color turquoise and lyrics of the 80s and 90s, but that's beside the point. Girlfriend, you don't have to hustle 24/7, 365 and continue to sacrifice your health, your relationships, and your sanity to be a successful mompreneur. As a small town girl living in a lonely world to a six-figure mompreneur, I am here to teach you how. There is a better way, and this podcast is your one-stop shop for all of the how-tos, the encouragement, the life hacks, the success tips, and of course, a little side of tough love. This is the Mompreneur Life Remixed podcast. So let's do this. Hey, friends, you are in for a real treat today with my Turquoise Talk guest, Juli Wenger. She is just an amazing coach, author, and you're going to be so blessed about this episode. She has a very soothing voice. So make sure you're doubled up on your caffeine when you listen to this episode. She's just got one of those very soothing voices. So Juli Wenger is the author of Fired Up, Fulfilled, and Free. Know who you are, get out of your own way, and live your purpose. A certified and internationally credentialed coach, a human ecologist, speaker, podcaster, certified breathwork facilitator, and a student of the Enneagram. She is devoted to guiding both Jesus followers and the spiritually curious through their journeys to the paths that God has laid out for them. In 2020, God called her to go on her own journey, leaving behind a successful 10-year real estate career to follow the path He had for her. Along the way, a passion for understanding who and whose we are, what our purpose is, and stepping into life with fearless confidence was born. As Juli discovered, when we understand these things, we can leave behind our battles with not enoughness and too muchness, ditch fear, and create a more loving, just, and compassionate-filled world. And Juli blends her training and expertise to walk you through the same life-transforming process that God brought her through and that she has guided clients and audiences through. We talk all things not enoughness. We talk about that transitioning out because her and I both went through that recently. When God called you out of a very successful business. So I think you'll love hearing her story when it comes to that transition, and maybe you're feeling that right now. So without further ado, get your pen and paper ready, and let's do this. Well, welcome back, friends, to the Mompreneur Life Remixed podcast. I am super excited about our focus for this month, which is on NO-vember, like as in that 2-letter word that we don't love to hear, we don't like to say. And I don't want you to hear just my perspective and my tips on being able to flex that muscle and being able to say no. So I'm bringing on some Turquoise Talk guests all throughout this month to talk about this topic and to really give you the tools you need, because going into the holiday season, it's a lot harder or can be a lot harder, a lot more complicated, a lot more people involved. Mm-hmm. And so I'm super excited to have Juli on the podcast with us today. Thank you so much, Juli, for being on here. Juli and I met in a group coaching program or mastermind program, and we've just stayed connected. And, you just have those people you just get connected to and stay connected. So I'm so thankful for you, Juli, and thank you for being willing to come on the show today.
I am so excited to have this conversation with you. And as you're talking about December, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, I have my own things literally after we record this that I need to go say no to, because there are so many opportunities to be out and with people and networking and Christmas parties and.
Right.
And it can be such overkill.
Right.
And it's such a pendulum swing from, COVID the last few years where you can't do anything.
Right.
And so, we get to be really intentional about how we approach this season of quote unquote post-COVID. I don't know what that means, but things seem to be back to more normal.
I think we're all trying to figure out what that new norm is. And now's the time to make those plans, before those parties show up, those invitations show up, like going ahead and now planning for, okay, what do you want your holiday season to look like? Mm-hmm. And the things we talk about today, you can take through any time throughout the year, but I just know specifically this year, this is where for me as a mom and a wife and a daughter and a sister and a friend, like this is where I feel the most pull into multiple directions. And I have to really get clear on, okay, what am I going to say yes to? What am I going to say no to?
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about you and your family and how you decided or became a mompreneur, since that is our main audience here.
Yeah, I am a mother to two littles. Kind of littles. They're 8 and 5. And so they are busy. One's in kindergarten this year. My son, Jackson, and my daughter, Kennedy's in grade 3. I'm also a stepmom to an 18-year-old that just started university this year, which is mind boggling.
I did not know that.
Okay. Yeah. That's a story for another day.
We'll bring you on for another podcast to talk about that.
Right? Yes. We'll go back in time. And I've been married for 17 and a half years to my husband. So becoming a mompreneur, I became an entrepreneur before I became a mom. So I was thinking about this, and my last career of real estate, I kind of stumbled into it. Mm-hmm. And I had this story. This is funny to me now, that I wasn't entrepreneurial and I couldn't run my own business. But real estate, there were kind of some parameters around it already and systems and things. So I was like, that's not really running a business. I was wrong. I was so fundamentally wrong. And it gave me this opportunity to learn and to develop some skills and to start to see that I actually can run a business, and I am wired for that. And I have the capacity to really serve people. So that there's an interesting transition there of being a realtor and then becoming a mom, and the tension between the two spaces. Right. And then I had my second kid, and the tension turned into just way too much. So when my son was about 1 year old, I hit burnout, like full on. I was anxious. I was up till midnight. I was worrying about everybody. I was worrying about making all the clients happy. I wasn't happy. I wasn't present. And I got to this point where I said, something has to change. Right. And there's a whole transition story in there, and we'll see what we get into. But in terms of intentionally becoming a mompreneur, of saying, okay, this thing, this is not working for my family. This is not what I'm called to. This is not right for me. This is not a fit. I'm going to step into something that is something that I'm actually built for. That led me into the space of coaching and writing and speaking. And with that came this really cool opportunity to be home and be with my kids and have more flexibility, because real estate is super reactive. Right. Yeah. And people think you have freedom, but it's like, there's only so much you can engineer out. So there were boundaries, but it still wasn't enough. And mentally, there's still that pull all the time. So I stepped into this coaching space, and it was beautiful and so God-led, because then the pandemic hits and my kids need me and the world is shut down. And I have this capacity now and this ability to actually be present with them and guide them through and put them to bed at night and all of these things that had been kind of hit and miss. So the real becoming a mompreneur, I would consider more that transition out of this old default space and into something that gave me the ability to actually do both. And that just happened in the last, am I hearing this right? Like 2-3 years, like that transition? Yeah, the transition was about 3 years ago in terms of actually starting the new business. It was about 4 years ago now that I hit the wall. Right. And it took a bit of time to figure out what was going to be next and to wrap my head around change, because I also had all these identity attachments, right? Because I was successful and people looked at me and they're like, how do you do this? Can you teach me? And I'm in imposter syndrome, right? Of course. If you knew how much of a mess I am, you would not be asking. And there is just there's this challenge around, I make multiple 6 figures and I'm seen as successful and I fit in, quote unquote, for the first time in my life, because I've always been that awkward, try hard girl. And I don't want it. I don't want it. I've achieved success by someone else's standards and I don't want it. Right. So wow, it's been an interesting journey. That's a powerful self-awareness though, because I know there's someone listening today who feels that exact same thing. And the year that I've
just getting ready to come through. I'm thinking about last year, this time is when that was really pulling on me pretty strongly to make that change and that change and that transition. And it's a hard place to be. And it's a hard decision to make because there's a lot of security, right? And in that. But what I'm hearing is it just there was no peace for you.
No, there was this constant success chasing and proving. And as I look back on it now, everything was, I need to be self-made. And I need to measure up to these perceptions I have of what enough is and what valuable is and what success is. And I was looking for external validation every day, all day long. Can people affirm me? Can they tell me that I'm needed? Can they tell me I'm wanted? Can they tell me they see me as successful? Like, what is it that I can get from other people that will feed into me and meet this need? But the challenge there is it's always unsustainable and the bar always moves.
Right.
So even if you hit success, like where I was when I stepped out, there was always someone else who was doing way more. I was at by no means the top of the totem pole in terms of our local industry. So there's just this like chasing to get these hits of, I just need to feel like I'm valuable.
Right.
And then they disappear and it was okay, what's next?
Right. So since you kind of touched on it, we're kind of already there. Like, I would love for you to share because you have experienced burnout. That was going to be a question to ask you. I love to ask every guest that, but I do see that it presents itself for people in a different way. So how did it show up for you? Like, what were you physically feeling, emotionally feeling? And then how did you work your way out of it?
I was anxious.
Okay. And
I was worried about everything blowing up, just the whole business imploding, my life imploding. So there was a lot of worry and there was a lot of needing to control things. And I was short-tempered. And at work, I would turn on the people pleaser. Right. At work, it was, I've got to make everybody happy and to the extremes. And then I'd get home and I'd be completely burnt out, just done. I had nothing left. So even, bedtimes were a struggle because the kids feed off our energy, right? They're like little mirrors. And I'd go to put them to bed and they just wouldn't settle. And I was so just so wound up tight. And I'm actually curious looking back if there was maybe a little bit of postpartum anxiety with my second. And I don't know, and I probably never will, but it was this tension in my whole body. And I realized that I wasn't even breathing really. Like there's just this shallow, fast racing, I've got to do more. I've got to do more. I've got to do more. And the burnout, there were these pendulum swings, where there would be days where I just couldn't do anything. And then there would be days where I'm so behind, I just got to do things, which is also underpinned by ADHD, where it's like, now I have deadlines and they're almost due and I got to, now I have motivation to go. Yeah. So it was just up and down and roller coaster and carrying everybody. I think that's the other piece that has been very interesting. And it ties in with the people pleasing, is I took responsibility for everyone else's happiness and success in my life. So all the clients, whether their houses sold or not, whether they found something or not, whether they were like ecstatic about the process or not, that was all on my shoulders. And how was I showing up as a wife? That was all on my shoulders. How was my husband happy? Was he, feeling like he had value? Was he succeeding in his career? Were my kids well adjusted? There were so many expectations that I put on me. And just tried to carry around this big backpack full of stuff that wasn't mine. Wow. Fundamentally was not mine in the first place. And in terms of moving out of it, what's interesting is how long of a process that was and how I had to fundamentally redefine everything in my life. There was this point where I just gave up and I said, okay, God, like this is not working. Obviously my plan is not working. I need you to fix this. And what he illuminated to me over the next number of months was that I didn't even know who I was anymore because I lost myself in trying to be everything to everybody for probably my whole life. Really. I don't even know when this began. So I had to figure out who's Juli. And before I could figure out who's Juli, I had to start to plug some of the leaks in my life, right? There was this term, energy vampires. I still kind of love it, of who is in my life that I've attracted. Okay. Like my bat signal to the world is I'll fix you and I'll help you and I'll carry your stuff. So then I'll, attract all of the needy people and all of the entitled people.
We're so much alike. It's crazy.
Oh, I know. But I had to look at my whole business and I had to look at my whole life, and everyone from my personal trainer to my clients, like they were all just sucking out of me, and I'd taught them to.
Right.
Yeah. I had to take personal responsibility for that because I had allowed those people to be in my space and to pull out of me. But I thought about it like this energy barrel, right? If you think of a barrel that's full of water and you have these people in your life that you allow to just take, it's like there's a hole in the side of the barrel.
Right.
So if you're trying to fill yourself up so that you can show up and so that you can be effective and so that you can love well and all of those things, you can't fill up past the point of these holes.
Right.
And I had to fire people and just have people exit my life and start disconnecting from people and friends and all sorts of things. Like my sphere almost completely changed. And so that was a step. And then I had to start learning to take care of me, which as a recovering people pleaser, and if anyone in here is a Enneagram nerd, is a type 2 helper who is give, and others focused, taking care of me is like, no, that's not okay. So I had to learn to like me, and I had to learn to choose to take care of me,
right,
and to take breaks and to breathe. And some of that is still a struggle, if I'm being totally honest. It's so hardwired and it's so deeply ingrained. But as I started to plug the leaks and I started to shift who I was with, which is so important,
right,
I started to get this clarity on my identity beyond all of these checklists for enoughness, all of these roles, all of these people that were in my life and these commitments that I had and this job that I was showing up in. And the identity piece became about being more than all of those things. There was this question that actually was one of my old coaches asked me, and she said, who are you without all of the, the mom, the wife, the work, the whatever, like if you take all of that out of the equation, who are you? What's left? And I was like, I don't know. And she pushed me to work through that process and, ask God. And so I did. And he gave me that I am love, joy, strength, light, and grace. That is how I reflect him. That's how he's reflected through me. And it's this higher level thing that then I get to show up as in the different spaces.
Right.
So at work, I get to show up as that. In a parental role, I get to show up as that. As a wife, I get to show up as that in my volunteer commitments. And that started to shift the expectations I had of me. Because now I had something to evaluate against. Instead of saying, okay, I need to be all of these things for other people, I could say, well, if this is me and this is how he's wired me, and this is where my talents are and what takes me out, and my superpowers and my kryptonites, all those things, then does this expectation even fit?
Right. Right.
Is this something I even need to carry, or is it a big old, that's not mine?
Right.
And that's boundaries, right? We start to build. I didn't know what boundaries were. I didn't even know what boundaries meant. Literally, I did not know what boundaries meant. And I took this, in the pandemic, I took this Dare to Lead certificate, and oh my goodness, like Brene Brown is my favorite human. She's like my hero in life, but listening to her define boundaries, it's so simple.
Right.
Here's what's mine. Here's what's not mine. Here's what's okay. Here's what's not okay. That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
And it was like, my whole mind was just like, what? That's it.
We overcomplicate. Yeah. We overcomplicate everything and overanalyze everything. The majority of us do. And I think, I can tell, I mean, you have a big heart and you care, and you want to show up well in all of those areas. And a couple of things that I wanted to point out to the listeners is that you slowed down. So you paused. You were probably forced to pause because you weren't going to slow down your own. So God was like, you know what? Sit down right here.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to let you run right out of steam.
I'm going to let you burn out, and then we're going to refill you back up the right way. And that you also got help, and I think that's really important. I think so many people, either wait until they are just at that bursting point or that burnout point before they get help. And I try, one of the purposes of this podcast is to help you to prepare versus repair, because it's a lot harder to repair the damage than to try to prevent it. So I love that either you had a coach or you had a mentor or maybe a therapist, and it takes someone else because you're too close to it a lot of times to even see those blind spots and to see the areas that you're still having that, warped thinking or those warped expectations. And so I really just encourage whoever's listening, if you're just like, yes, I'm relating to her story so much, like get the help that you need.
Mm-hmm. I would not have come through without.
You have high blood pressure and you go to the cardiologist and you get blood pressure medicine. Like God put people in positions to be our healthcare, and to help us through that. So I just really want someone to be encouraged to get that professional help if they need it.
Absolutely. The way of thinking that gets us to where we are is not a way of thinking that allows us to create different results. And we get stuck in our own mud, and that it's like sticky up to your knees, thick mud, and it's surrounded by trees and you don't know which way is out. And when we can bring people in, whether that's our friends or our coaches or our therapists or whoever in our life, they can zoom out because they're not emotionally attached to our stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And they can say, hey, I see options here, or I see a way out over there, or move this way. And that is so vital, because otherwise, our ego gets in the way, right? That subconscious us that tries to keep us safe. And it says, I have this frame of reference for life. All I need is survival. You're surviving, whether you're burnt out or not. I know how to get my needs met, whether it's healthy or not in this space.
Right.
So let's just stay here.
Right. Yeah.
And we sometimes have to get to a point where that is so painful and we're so done that we can choose to change. And ideally, it doesn't take that. Ideally, we start to understand that underlying psychology earlier. But that for me was, I just have to hit that wall so hard that despite my ego fighting to keep me the same, I have enough motivation to start moving forward. Grown-up me has enough motivation to make some calls and find some people and instigate some growth in those first steps and those first stages. And then I have the people that are now pulling me along or calling me up and saying, hey, this is how we see you compared to how you see you. Here's where we see your potential compared to where you see your potential.
Right.
And if we can just choose to be available to that, it can start to shift the way we think, which is one of my favorite passages of scripture, Romans 12:2, but the version or the translation that says that we allow God to change the way we think, because there's also, renewing your mind and those other ways that we get translated, but changing the way we think. And because there is this thought to behavior path, right, where we have a thought and we wrap a story or previous experiences and stuff around it, and then that turns into emotions, which turn into behaviors. There's this whole flow through.
Right.
If we can change the way we think, there's a cascade of change.
Right.
So the people are one of the greatest tools, and I believe one of the greatest tools God uses to help us change the way we think. And then, I love this part, and then after we do that, and then you can learn his will for your life, which is good and pleasing and perfect. I'm like, okay, like there is a this, then that.
Right. There's a step to the process, and we can't skip over any of it. And I think we want to get to that end result, and we try to skip some of the hard stuff. And that's part of growing, and that's part of faith's journey. And that's part of this testimony that he's building for you to be able to share, because only someone who's been through, burnout or been through transitioning out of, a secure multiple six-figure income into the unknown can truly help someone who's getting ready to go do the same thing. So a lot of the things that I heard you say kind of come back to this flexing of the no muscle, because, you had to say no to that opportunity, right? That was so secure for you, even though it was burning you out. Like it still it was still feeding you. You're still getting a reward, or you wouldn't have stayed there as long as you did. And then these people and these holes that you realize were, taking the energy or the water out of your barrel. So maybe how could you encourage those that are listening? How do you, if this is something they really struggle with and they don't know how to communicate it appropriately, or they feel the need to make this transition, they don't even know how to talk to their spouse about even the idea of leaving. I remember that feeling like, how could I even tell Shaw that I'm thinking about, that I'm not happy here anymore. I feel like God's calling me to somewhere else. Like that's a scary conversation, even with the people that you love the most and trust the most. So can you kind of speak into that a little bit?
I think that we need to acknowledge that it's okay to be scary, for the process to be scary. And that there's really this step first, I think, of asking God where he wants us to go. Right? If I had just sat down one day and said, I'm not happy and that's it. And I'm just going to back out and I don't know what I'm going to do. And I don't have a plan. I don't have direction. I don't have clarity of purpose. I don't have any of that. Like, okay, honey, we're just going to abandon this success that I have right now. And then we'll figure it out. Like, that's not a smart way to go about this. We want to be intentional and not impulsive. One of the first steps, I think, in getting clarity and starting to build towards this is understanding, what are we built for? I think that's one of the foundational principles. And within that is this identity piece, right? Who am I? Because that helps us filter down into purpose. But it's interesting because I was having this conversation with a new client a couple of weeks ago, and it was, I got to get my husband on board, and he's kind of like, go get a real job. And I had to say to her, look, like, we got to learn to trust you. You got to learn to trust you, but let's do some of this foundational work of figuring out what even is the direction you're moving in? What is the direction that you're being called to go? Because we can randomly pick something out of the air and we can try and build towards it. But if it's not the direction you're called to, if it's not this path that's custom created for you and that you're custom created for, we're just going to hit more burnout, and we're just going to hit more frustration. And we're going to end up in the same place 4 years from now, having the same conversation with him again. And now he's like, but we already have been through this rodeo.
Right.
So the taking of time to really get curious about, what is it that fires me up? What is it that gives me life? What is it that makes me angry? What is it that in my life has been the most fulfilling, whether it's relationships or work or experiences or otherwise, and start to look for themes. Because if we can start to focus our attention and our energy onto, what is it that is my superpower? What gives me life? Then we can start to get curious about where the opportunities might lie. Because we need to have some kind of a plan. And I mean, personally, it wasn't like I jumped ship in 3 days. So there's also a grace to have with yourself as you're exploring transition, and knowing that your ego is going to fight you like every step of the way, of saying it's okay for it to take some time. And I'm a fast mover. It took me a year to really wrap my head around, okay, maybe it's not real estate. Like, I asked God, just fix my business. Can we just do this differently? And I'll just keep doing this. That's what I thought this was going to be. And I can just see him going, oh, that's cute. But, I had to work my way through the process, and the clarity doesn't just come overnight.
No, it does not.
And I think that we need to give, this piece is really important too. We need to give our spouses, we need to give our husbands time to catch up. Right? There is a pre-existing expectation. There's a social contract in play, because here's how I show up, and here's how you show up, and here's what you do, and here's what I do. And our egos, subconscious us, attaches to that and says, okay, this is normal. This is how we function. And so if we come home and we say, I'm miserable at my job and I want to change, their ego is going to freak out, because that is not how we do things around here, even if consciously they're supportive. And so I think starting to have some conversations to say, I need to explore what change looks like. And I'm not sure what change is going to look like, but just heads up, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. I'm going to start to look at this and figure out what might be an option. And, I could really use your support in that journey. And also understanding, because we know our husbands well, right?
Right.
The understanding their needs. How do they communicate? How do they handle change? How impulsive are they? What is it that communicating something to them, like I'm going to make this massive transition, or I might make a massive transition, or I think I might ditch this job where I've been paying myself 10K plus a month and start up a new business where I might not pay myself at all for a few months. Like that is how are they going to respond to that kind of thing? And what does that mean? Not in a playing small capacity, but just in stewarding what we have well. What does that mean for us in taking the time to save up or to build a buffer? Now, sometimes God has his own plans. Okay. I just want to sidebar for a second, because when I got into the summer, after I kind of had all of this identity clarity, God was like, and now we're going. Now you need to walk away. I was like, no. Not ready to cut the cord yet. I'm just gonna hang out here. I'm gonna find someone to buy the business. Yeah. Oh, really? Like, let's blow up that opportunity. And then maybe I could just sell these few houses that already have offers on them. They should go through. Like 99.9% of the time, these things would happen. He's like, oh, these deals over here, you just blew everything up.
Wow.
And so sometimes, despite our planning, because many are the plans of man, but despite our planning, he's like, no, we're going now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to listen for that. We have to really partner with him in figuring out what is the next and where is the next step, and just following his pace and his path and moving when he says move. But most of the time, having watched people go through this, most of the time it's not abrupt.
No. And I think what you said earlier about communicating with your spouse, like you've already been having this conversation with yourself for a long time. At least I felt like I did before I was able to communicate it appropriately to Shaw, and also was not expecting him to be like, okay, great, let's go right now. Like, you're good. Like I was not expecting that. I wasn't even expecting him to really fully understand it. I guess it was still shocking to me that I was even having this thought. But to your point, like we've already been having this conversation, so it's familiar to us. So you can't just show up and be like, all right, let's go. We're going to pack up everything we know that's familiar, and we're going to head down the road to the land of unknown because God hasn't told me where we're going next. So that's, definitely not a way to communicate it. But that is interesting because we are thinking about it way longer before we actually present it to the person. And I would say the same thing, if we can kind of segue a little bit into this saying no, and the people that were, zapping your energy and putting the holes in your barrel. Like you had to, once you came to terms, okay, this is who I am, not in all these identity roles, but this is who, Juli is. And now you had to realize, okay, these people don't, even just for this season, maybe they're just zapping the energy out. Yep. So what did those conversations look like? And again, for someone who's like, I've got some of those people that are just energy vampires, how do I remove myself respectfully, because women think they're being mean. They think they're being selfish. They think that, well, they're going to think I'm intentionally trying to let them down. And that's just not the truth. The truth is you have clarity now around what's important to you. And now not everybody can go with you where you're going next.
Yeah. When I had those conversations, I was 800% a conflict avoider. There was nothing comfortable for me about having to let people go. And there was a range. So there were people that I could just drift from and just be less active in terms of involvement in the relationship. And because I was carrying people so much, I was often the one that was doing all the reach out and the planning. And it wasn't reciprocated. So there were some places where I could say, okay, this just doesn't fit. So I'm going to just let go of being the one that reaches out and the plans things and the connects and whatever. And we'll just allow that to kind of peter off in its own way. Those ones, that was more comfortable. I still had to wrap my head around, but they need me. It's like, no, Juli, that's your pride. just
that's
stop
so
it.
True.
I need to be needed. But the more uncomfortable ones were the ones that required potential conflict. Okay. Not necessarily that it would be, but potentially could be.
Yeah.
And I think about, the definition of fear, and in Atlas of the Heart, Brené Brown defines fear as something that is triggered both psychologically and physically in the same part of our brain. And in the research, the biggest fear from a psychological perspective is a fear of social rejection. So I, as a people pleaser and a conflict avoider who is terrified of people not liking me, has to now have conversations with people that are going to potentially lead to conflict and rejection and people not liking me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Was that ever triggering and hard, but also building me, right? I had to learn how to say things that people didn't like. So I started to go through and make a list of, who are the clients that need to go? Who are the friends that I need to just distance from? Where are the commitments that I just need to say no to? And there were conversations that I could frame out in a way that was kind and like, it's me, it's not you, like legitimately, like, community league memberships or leadership positions and that kind of thing, where I just would have to say to them, look, in this season of life, I don't have the capacity to continue on with this commitment. And those were easy, but framing them out without space to have a conversation was really key. Like, this is not something I want to have a conversation about. This is not something that we're going to explore, but I'm not doing this anymore.
This is a no, and that's a complete sentence. I don't have to my way. Yeah.
And we just don't like, maybe we can later, or none of that. Nope. Just like less words. So there were those. And then there were people that I was working with. And because it's a transactional industry in real estate, there were some of them that honestly, God just allowed me to wrap up.
Right.
Where the sales would come together. It's like, okay, that's great. And there were some that our contract was ending. And I just said to them, we've done what we can. I think it would be in your best interest to find someone else who can try something different.
Right. Yeah.
And those are okay. But there were a couple that I legitimately had to phone and say, look, this isn't working. We're no longer working together. And some of those conversations rocked me because I got the aggressive conflict back of, I just don't understand. And you're supposed to this, and you should, and guilting and shaming and all of the things. And I just had to sit there and take a deep breath and just let them say what they needed to say. And then, I hear you. I'm sorry you feel that way. The decision's been made.
Right. Yeah.
I hear you. I'm sorry you feel that way. The decision's still been made. And, I'll send you the paperwork, or here, we'll come out and we'll get whatever stuff we have there. And those ones are really hard.
Yeah.
And I had to make sure that I had accountability to follow through on it. And I had my team and I had my assistants, and they knew, like, these people are not good. We told you not to take them in the first place, Julie. And I didn't listen because I wanted to make everybody happy on the client side, and scarcity, right? Because sometimes we lean into that as mompreneurs, but I had to have the accountability, and then I had to have a safe space to land so that I could go to someone, because I was still so insecure because I was searching for all of this validation outside, that I needed to have people who could feed back into me after these experiences and tell me that I was enough. And that it was okay, and that I made the right decision, and then tell me the same thing like 8,000 times, which frankly was not healthy.
No, it's not.
But it was that's where it was, right? Like, I look at that now, I'm like, that is ridiculous. Right. I just I'm going to fill up this temporary affirmation thing over here because I just got sucked out of over there. It's not sustainable, but I think we need to honor the spaces that we're in.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And then, other places where it's just like the personal trainer thing was like, I'm just not coming anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And that was that. So, and then I cleared out my Facebook and my Instagram. That I think is important too. Just unfriend people. It's okay.
Yeah. It's okay. It's okay. If they're not feeding your soul and feeding your energy and feeding your next steps and your goals, then why are we watching?
Yeah. And there's a personal growth piece of that, because sometimes, because we live in this cancel culture, right? It's like, I'll just get rid of everyone who triggers me. But I think we have to look at it more as, given the growth space that I'm in, given the state that I'm in, what is it that I need to at least temporarily eliminate from me seeing, not because there's an issue with what they're doing, but because I don't have the capacity or the tools or the self-worth to see it and not spiral.
Right. Yeah.
So it can be sometimes about like that person's just toxic and I need to not ever see their name again.
Right.
And other times it's, I know that where I'm at, I'm not in a position to see that stuff and have it not just drive me nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I love all this. So you mentioned guilt earlier, and I do like to ask this question as well, as far as mom guilt, because I know for a lot of the mompreneurs that are listening, we feel guilty if we're not working, and then when we're working, we feel guilty that we're not with our family. And so, how do you deal with mom guilt? I mean, it's not that it ever really goes away 100%, but
yeah, it doesn't. It still shows up.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've realized, especially as I've done this identity work and started to understand that my enoughness is settled because God created me, right? If he loved me into existence, like that's done.
Right.
I don't need to search for worth and value from other places. No, it's a work in progress, but like it's done. And then being able to root back into, I am love, joy, strength, light, and grace. That's me. That's the core of me. And I show up in this space as mom, and I show up in this space as business owner or boss or coach or whatever. Those are no longer the primary source of my value or my identity. And I think that where mom guilt can so often take us out is because we've over attached our value to that particular role.
That's good.
And I also have had to look at our kids are on their own journey. It sucks as a mom when your kids are struggling.
Yeah.
Like my 8-year-old has struggled through the pandemic. There is like, and I'm realizing there's generational anxiety patterns, which is super interesting, but there has been this just hard season for her. And as a mom, I'm like, I want to fix it. I want to make it better. And what's wrong with me that she's struggling? And where did I fail her that she's struggling? And some of her stuff, of course, reflects some of the stuff I went through. Of feeling like, do I belong? So then it triggers all my old imprints. And there has been this coming back to over and over and over again. No, she's on her journey. And just like God built me through my life and my experiences, he's going to build her. And I keep on my wall beside my computer monitor, James 1:4 of let perseverance finish its work so you may be mature and complete and lacking nothing.
Like
lacking nothing, nothing. And if she doesn't go through her own journey, if I don't allow them to experience life, if I don't allow them to struggle and just show up the best that I can, then they won't be built. And I can actually rob them of their opportunity to grow into who they're supposed to be. If I try to fix it all the time. So there's just this understanding that they're his kids first.
Yeah.
And he will give me the grace and what I need to be able to guide them to the best of my ability, which will not be perfect because I'm not. Because perfect doesn't exist outside of him. And they will have to build their own perseverance and their own endurance and their own character. And all of that is vitally important. And so, I mean, it's hard still.
Yeah, it is.
I still have my spiral moments, but
well, I know there's some that are listening and they're probably thinking, man, I want to be where she's at. Like I'm in this struggle season with my child right now. And you weren't saying these things in the middle or the beginning stages of the struggle that, so you've done the work. And I think that's what I want people to hear is that it does require some reflection. It requires some conversations, some hard conversations. It requires being in your Bible and reading and praying and seeking wise counsel. So just because she's where Julie's at today doesn't mean that she wasn't where you're at right now. And I think that's the cool thing about having her come on and kind of share so vulnerably is that she understands and we understand mom guilt. We understand those moments where you're like, am I just completely screwing my kids up? I mean, there are so many days where I'm like, am I just completely screwing them up? And there's no parent manual, I mean, there's just really not. And so, be mindful of your own self-talk and what you're saying to yourself and the stories you're writing in your own head that are not truth, which is why it's so important to have your people in your village,
the right people.
The right
that don't
people.
shit all over you. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, okay. So I was talking to Julie before we started recording so the other day I posted a reel about saying no and just kind of kicking off this November. And a friend reached out to me and she was just sharing with me this perception that I had not really thought about, how her friend struggles with saying no because she fits in. Like she feels the
Mm-hmm.
need to do and go and be and do all the things these other people are doing because she's trying to fit into this specific friend group. So she's
Yeah.
working a full-time job, she's dog walking, and she's, just like burning herself out because she's trying to fit in. And so I asked Julie, like, that was a different, I mean, it all leads back to people pleasing, but it was just a really interesting, like, not saying no to fit in. That was a really interesting perception. So
Yeah.
share with them what you were kind of sharing with me about the becoming and
Yeah,
belonging.
this is something that I understand so, so deeply. I don't want to say no because I want people to accept me. I want to feel wanted. I don't want to make them feel unwanted by saying no. There's just this deeply wired, how do I make everybody else happy? And if they ask me to come, then obviously I need to say yes.
Right.
And there's been this interesting conversation and exploration lately of belonging. And I started thinking about it more as I was writing the book, but even more lately, as I'm working on my next assignment, I've been thinking about belonging and authenticity. And one of the things I've realized is that belonging requires authenticity. And fitting in is essentially us adapting ourselves to what we think is acceptable for common consumption. How do I change me so that everyone else will like me or appreciate me or validate me? But it's not actually them validating us. So even if we do get to a point of quote unquote belonging, it's not real because it's not us.
Right.
So there's this quote that as we were having this conversation, I wanted to just hit on, and again, Brene, she's my hero, but she defines it as this innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. And she says, because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes for belonging, but often barriers to it.
Wow.
Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. So there's this self-love and self-acceptance and self-worth that is actually a requirement of us belonging to ourselves. And then also, as believers, we belong to God. Like we're created to belong to Him, those who are called to belong to Him.
Right.
And if we can find our value and our worth in that relationship, then we can show up authentically. And then we can learn to like ourselves and learn to love ourselves and stop trying to be everybody else. Everyone else is wired differently.
Right.
Everyone else has a different purpose, a different calling, a different lane, a different, like everything's different. And then we can show up as authentically us, right? Unapologetically authentic. And the people who actually then do appreciate us and do want to spend time with us and do, show up in a space and say like, you belong here.
Right. Yeah.
There is an authenticity to that is so much more satisfying than trying to, how do I shift me? And so often that's subconscious. So I think we have to have a lot of grace for ourselves there too.
Right. Right.
But are we managing people's perceptions? Are we in perception management, or are we operating from a place of authenticity? Which again is where this identity piece is so important, because that underpins, okay, how do I show up as whatever our identity is, as how do I show up as love? How do I show up as strength? How do I show up as grace? So I'd said this in the book, that belonging is authenticity and fitting in is forcing yourself into a box. That belonging is falling into God's arms and knowing that He doesn't need you to change who you are. And it's the changing who we are and burying parts of us that is where the lack of belonging originates. So I think that's why authenticity is so important and why this relationship with God is so important, because without those two things, this primary need as humans to feel safe and seen and loved and accepted and to matter, right? We want to know we matter.
Right.
We can't meet that need from a place of inauthenticity.
Right. Yeah. I love that. That's so good. There's so much meat in that. Like, I know you're going to go back and listen to this episode over and over and over again, because just there's little things that she said that just flies out of her mouth. I'm like, wait, we could go back and spend like 3 hours talking about just that one little piece. But yes, I mean, if you're not happy with yourself, then it is hard to show up authentically. And,
And you might not even know what authentically is.
Right. Yeah.
Like I sure didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't know who authentic Juli was because literally my whole life I was being this inauthentic version of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But God knew.
That's right.
He knows.
Yeah.
And he's just hanging out there waiting, like, when you're ready, we'll go on this journey. And I mean, it's not going to be fun all the time. Let's just be real about that.
Inner work is hard. I mean, work on yourself is hard. And it is the work that most people don't do. And so we just keep going and living up to expectations of others, and they're frustrated and they're, all of these things. If we would just slow down long enough to kind of do some of this work, which again is not always easy, but it's very fruitful in the end when you actually take the time to do that. So a lot of the questions I wanted to ask you, but we've had such a great time already talking. But if you had the opportunity to talk to all the mompreneurs just for a few minutes, what's the main thing you would want them all to know they're listening today? Or if you were able to just stand on a mountaintop and say, mompreneurs, here's what I want you to know.
There's a concept around traveling together that has been so potent for me this year. And it kind of relates to what we've been talking about, but it's kind of a divergence in a sense too. When we are walking in our calling, when we're living out our purpose, which hopefully is what we're doing. If we're running our own businesses, if we're building our own things, and if we're not, then there's something in us that knows, but we're not meant to walk it out by ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not meant to change by ourselves. We're not meant to create change in the world by ourselves. We're not meant to experience life in isolation. And honestly, isolation is one of the most powerful tools of the enemy to try and feed us stories and to drive us into shame and self-doubt and all of those things that take us out of our power. So traveling together, finding those people who you can link up with and pull each other along, right? To encourage each other to walk down your own lanes, but to do it together as this advancing front. That's a visual that has been so present for me all year. And there's a passage in Ephesians 4 in the Message translation that talks about how we were all called to travel on the same road. So stay together, both inwardly and outwardly. And the togetherness, the moving together, the advancing the front together, it requires a certain kind of person.
Yeah.
And I've been talking a lot lately about, they're totally made up categories. So just, heads up, but about how we need to surround ourselves with encouragers and empathizers and mentors and challengers. We need those people who will call us up and call us forward and call us on our crap.
Yep.
And we don't need people who are shooting all over us. We don't need people who are commiserating. We don't need people who are just holding us back and anchoring us to old versions of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this boundaries conversation that we're having, when we get to this point of, are you walking in purpose and are you advancing at the pace that you're supposed to be? Are you arriving on time? There's so much that hinges on who are you giving your time and your energy to. Now, that's not to say we just cut everybody out that is an anchor, but it's how do I show up in that relationship, or what boundaries do I build around how much time we spend together, or what I talk to them about. Like I got those people, okay, who it's just, I'm not going to have a conversation about anything of real consequence.
Right. Yeah.
When I see them, because it's not going to serve anybody, because I know they fit into that commiserator or shooter kind of category.
Right.
So be cognizant of the who and ask God to send you your army, because he will.
Yeah.
And then we link up with those people and we pull them along and they pull us along and we move at whatever pace we're supposed to be moving at.
Yeah.
And just follow his lead.
I love it. So awesome. This was so good. Like, I think I'm probably going to go back and listen to it too. So thank you so much for being on here.
Welcome.
I do like to kind of ask at the end, just some like quick questions, like what's your favorite book you're reading right now? Oh, actually before that, speaking of books, you mentioned it earlier. What are you most excited about in this season? I know what some of it is, but tell the listeners like what's exciting right now for you.
So I released my first book in the summer. It's called Fired Up, Fulfilled, and Free. And it walks through a lot of this, right? Know who you are, get out of your own way, live your purpose. And so the getting clarity on identity and why we're here and how fear is getting in the way and how to actually walk it out so that we can be excited and be ready and be in position for what God has for us. And we can be following, which is where fulfillment, sustainable fulfillment originates. And there's a freedom in doing that. right? That's the target. So that is available on Amazon. So if anyone wants to dive in a little deeper, they can go and grab the book. The other thing that I'm so excited about is the next assignment that God gave me is to build out a course. And this is so funny because old overachiever me was like, push, get it done. But it's been such a co-creation that's based on the book, but there's all this additional content and context and some of what he's even been leading me through since I wrote the book a year ago. And so we're looking at cohorts and having people travel together because that's so fundamentally important and working through this process very actively. So the wait list is open for that. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to be ready because he has me in a season of my timing, not yours, Julie.
Right.
So just a continual build. But I can say it's going to be epic.
Yeah.
Like life changer epic. And I mean, glory to God on that one because
that's so exciting. I mean,
so if you want to get on the wait list for, we're calling it the Fear to Freedom Playbook.
I love it.
Yeah.
That is so awesome. And I'll put all the links. She's going to send me all the links to any of these things, the book and the wait list and where you can find her on social and all of that. So I'm so proud of you. I'm so honored to, see you as a peer and as a friend and just a fellow servant, I mean, that's what we're doing in our businesses. And it's nice to, like you said, link arms with those who are like-minded. And you and I definitely are. So real quick, what is your favorite book that you're reading? Or are you not reading because you just wrote a book?
Oh, I'm reading so much right now. I put myself into seminary somehow this fall.
That's right.
It's like a whole thing. But
so she's reading seminary stuff.
I just finished a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And it is so good.
Okay.
So good. So I highly recommend that one in terms of getting on the path and giving yourself tools. And there's a lot of alignment with some of the stuff I talked about, but he challenged me. And right now I'm listening to, there's a series that Transformation Church did like a year and a half ago. And it is all about like Holy Spirit and Mike Todd, just, I don't know, his energy. It's just contagious. Yeah. And so he is explaining that whole relationship between us and the Holy Spirit and what that looks like. And it's blowing my mind, honestly. Okay. So, Transformation Church, I mean, they've got tons of stuff that's really good, but if you go back in the archives, now the name of the actual episodes is escaping me, but
that's right. You can send it to me later and I'll add it in there for them. That's really fun.
Oh my goodness.
Do you have a favorite like business resource that helps you like that you use every day? Like you couldn't run your business without?
I mean, systems. I think it's partly a coping mechanism with ADHD, but I use Monday like a boss. Everything has to go in there. Everything has to get filtered through there, built into their timelines, all of that stuff, just so I can organize my brain. So that's been the big one in this season for me.
Yeah.
And
awesome. I've seen people talk about it, but I haven't looked into it. So I probably should look into it.
I mean, there's a lot of similar ones out there, but it's pretty. I like pretty.
Yes. So, okay. Last thing is, what is something that you do just for you that like to fill your cup?
Lately, I have been doing these kind of beginning and end of the day pauses. There's something called the Pause app, and it's by a guy who wrote a book called 30 Days to Resilience. And they're just these like really conscious breaks, mindfulness, God-focused meditations. And it's actually my therapist that recommended it. And they have just been so filling for me. And otherwise I just sing worship music in my office all the time because I'm a singer. So that's just what I do.
Which I forgot to tell them, like your voice is the most calming voice. Now, I have never heard you sing before. I'm not going to ask you. I'm not going to do that impromptu on you, but like your voice, when you speak, I'm sure people tell you that. Like, you have the perfect podcast voice. You have the perfect like audiobook voice. Like it's amazing. So I meant to tell people to pay attention to that. But they probably have already saying like, gosh, could she just like read me a bedtime story? I would sleep a lot better if she would.
I so want to get the audiobook done. You have no idea. Oh my goodness. I'm like, can we do it yet? And God's like, no, not yet. One thing at a time.
My timing, not yours. My timing, not yours, Julie. Well, this was really awesome.
Listen to the podcast. They can hop over and they can listen to the podcast.
There you go. Yeah. So she has her own podcast too. So I will put all of that in the show notes for you to get connected to her. And I just appreciate your time here today, helping these mompreneurs. And we'll be continuing this conversation on the power of the no and all the things that are involved with that to help you prepare for the holidays that you want and the future that you want and the business that you want, the relationships that you want, and really just getting clear on your priorities so that you can flex that muscle even easier. So thank you, Julie, for being a part of this conversation. That's so important. And I'm so excited for the course that's going to be coming out and all the things I know God's going to use you for. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. You're an inspiration to me. So I'm grateful to be here.
Well, thank you. All right, friends, we'll catch you on the next episode. Well, that's a wrap, friends, for this week's episode of the Mompreneur Life Remixed podcast. Thank you so much for listening and for following the show. It means so much to me. And listen, friend, sharing is caring. So if you loved this episode and thought of some fellow mompreneurs who could benefit, send them the link. Share this episode or take a screenshot and head on over to Instagram and share and tag me at Martine31Williams. We are connected on Instagram, right? It's where you will get all the fun behind the scenes of my life and business as a mompreneur. Until next time, know that I am believing in you always.